Good evening and welcome to episode 3 of SigmaTalks. This week's guest is Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee.
Dr. Lee, it's so good to have you on. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. First of all, to this chapter, I have nothing but love for the folks in this chapter. I've been a facilitator for a variety of conversations, some very important conversations, and I've also been a recipient of your very special award. I'm still humbled by that in many respects, and shout out to just the great Sigmas that are on this call. I'm actually happy to be a part of this conversation, primarily because I focus on issues related to digital inequity. So I am a senior fellow now. I got a promotion yesterday.
Congratulations.
At the Brookings Institution. Thank you. Not many sisters up there, so this matters a lot. And in that role, I focus on issues related to digital inequity, in addition to just how do we level the playing field when it comes to digital access. And so I'm working on a book right now around this topic called Digitally Invisible: How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. And my goal is to really highlight through a 7-city tour that I took last year, just what does digital access look like? And I think all of us on this call know that as a result of COVID-19, we're in crisis. And so I'll let you ask the questions, but I think, people need to understand that what we're seeing now may be something that all of us are taking advantage, even doing this Instagram Live. But there are communities that do not have access. They're in rural parts of the country. Some of our relatives in areas like Mississippi, Alabama, they're in places that are urban where the cost of broadband was so high that now some of the people that we're talking about are sitting in parking lots just accessing free internet to get stuff done. So yeah, that's the state of the state right now. And it's very depressing in addition to all of the medical concerns that we're currently dealing with.
Definitely, and we will definitely get to that topic specifically. My first question, and it's very with the times, with the COVID-19 pandemic occurring, throughout the world, not even just this country. A common phrase we're hearing a lot about is contact tracing. Can you explain what that process is?
Yes, so contact tracing is interesting. I actually wrote a piece on this recently. It is going to be the way that we actually engage in public health surveillance. And why is that important? It's important for a couple of reasons. One, there's always been some level of contact tracing in situations like this. We saw it with the HIV/AIDS epidemic, where when we were getting closer to a vaccination, we actually found ways to make sure that we were able to track people where they were to be able to reduce the rate of infection. Meaning, if someone had contact with an infected person, they would then contact trace back to the network of people they were in contact to in efforts to actually just stop the spread of the virus. And that was at the time applied to both HIV and Ebola. Now, fast forward to the COVID-19 pandemic, and what we're essentially seeing is the need to do the same type of surveillance. Now, when Black people hear the word surveillance, we get nervous because anything that sort of insinuates that there's going to be surveillance mean that it's going to be pretty much invasive. And we do have a lot to be nervous about. Even though on the digital side, the contact tracing is going to be done via Bluetooth, which takes puts some anonymous character into it. For the public health officials, somebody has to collect that data.
Right.
And so as a result of that, Chris, I think it's one of those cases where we're going to have to be just very mindful of what's the transparency in terms of the contact tracing, who is affected, and the extent to which people in our communities are going to be contact traced more than other communities. And by default, based on our rates of infection, we will be surveilled. Right. Point blank, we're going to be surveilled as part of this. The question becomes the extent to which there's privacy implications, and that's embedded in this. The extent to which we know about this kind of surveillance and what it's going to do, and the extent to which we can actually say yes or no to types of surveillance. Right. I think all of us should submit to the public health surveillance that will be necessary for your counties or your cities to ensure that they can track your networks of potential proximity to an infected person. But I think we also have to be mindful if there is going to be something that is sort of attached to our person or to our property, that we know what that is and we consent to that. And so far from what I'm hearing, that consent is out there, but you know how they do us.
Right. That was going to be my next, I was going to say, how can we consent or not consent if possible?
Well, I think we probably will all have to put skin in the game to not necessarily consent to not wanting to be contact traced. That's going to be most important,
Right.
Okay? Because that type of infection has the ability to kill us.
Right.
The second thing I would say is just being very clear about what you're consenting to. There was a report on the news today about the FTC essentially cracking down on predatory COVID response kits.
And that's the Federal Trade Commission?
Yes, I'm like, yeah, Federal Trade Commission, excuse me. Like, what is that? What are people selling, right?
Right.
They're selling like thermometers,
right,
and heat sensing, and you can get it all by mail. You know, our challenge will be, as a people that has been disproportionately affected by this virus, it's very important for us to understand that our data can be used in predatory ways. So it's almost as if there's so much data that's available about us. If we're not clear how it's going to be harnessed, you know, we run the risk of essentially getting predatory ads or services, you know, marketed back to us just by the nature of, you know, the amount of volumes of information that's been collected.
That's very insightful. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah. It's so insightful. I can't figure out how to hold this phone and talk to you at the same time.
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Dr. Lee, in your words, what is the digital divide we face in this country?
So the digital divide that we face in this country is real. You know, essentially, we're looking at close to 20 plus million people that are not connected. And in that 20 plus million people that are not connected, the majority of them are disproportionately African American or people of color, Latina. They're disproportionately low income. They tend to be disproportionately misrepresented in terms of education. And they're foreign born and they live in rural communities. And what does it mean when you're not digitally connected? It essentially means that you live in sort of like this tunnel of silence. Because I want to ask all of the people that are listening, you know, now that we can't go out and get our food, what are we relying upon? We're relying upon things like Uber Eats and DoorDash and Amazon and all these electronic companies.
Right.
If you're not connected, and I'm you know, pretty much Chris arguing that most people have some access to connectivity, but I'm talking about people who have to make determinations around broadband or bread, or have to figure out if they're going to help their child with their education online, to go buy a computer versus buying a car. And so there are still people that are disproportionately challenged when it comes to broadband access. And that is not just in the cost, but even where you live. There are people who live in the rural South, for example, the Black Belt, that do not have access, and they haven't had access for years. And so it's really important for us to look at this digital divide as not just a have and have not conversation, but it's a conversation around equity. And the less that you are connected, the less equitable opportunity you will have to the resources that are essentially making America today. Right.
So you would say that COVID-19 has illuminated this issue that has been there. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I know I might look old today. I haven't had my hair done in so long. I'm struggling with the IG, even though I listen to DJ Nice every time he come on. So I know how to play it, but I don't know how to be on it, you know. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is not an issue that just popped up, right? This is an issue that has been 20 years in the making. I mean, our dear friend, a brother, Larry Irvin, talked about the digital divide some time ago when it came to the haves and the have-nots. You know, our big challenge today is to sort of make sure that the internet is democratized in a way where people in the greatest need of these types of opportunities aren't on the wrong side.
Right.
So what the coronavirus has done, by forcing us to all retreat within the comfort of our homes or our communities, it's actually laid out this social isolation that, in fact, digital access could help break. So we are all insulated. So imagine being in a home where you don't have access right now. Who are you talking to? Who are you communicating with?
You wouldn't even be able to watch this talk.
No, there's no way you would watch this talk, because, you know, you wouldn't have access to a connectivity to run this type of connection. So these are like real issues that we really need to deal with.
Wow. So would you say that that's the biggest issue facing the African American community today?
I think that digital access is a major issue, and I think it is one that deserves a lot of attention. So if you were to ask me, I would say yes. think
Okay.
other people may say healthcare is an issue. I would equally say that healthcare is as equally misrepresented and under-resourced African-American communities as digital technology. I think we're at a stage right now where everything matters. It's an all hands on deck game.
Sure.
And so I think we as a community cannot continue to choose between, well, let's make sure they give us more jobs when those jobs in the future work is dependent upon technology. You see what I mean?
Right.
So we have to be a part of both conversations. It's no longer either or. When I was first in this space, people used to talk about digital technology as sort of like on the margins. It wasn't integrated into voting. It wasn't integrated into healthcare. It wasn't integrated into education. Well, I'm going to tell you something. We come out of COVID-19, there'll be no educational institution who will not have to grapple with the ugly truth that they could not get their kids in the classroom via an online portal because of inequity. And so I think, the same thing we're seeing with telehealth. There's going to be no doctor that is not going to in some way suggest that you actually do a remote visit. So the analog train has left the station.
Wow.
We are now in a state where being online is actually really surfacing the inequalities of being in line.
That's profound. That's profound. Can you talk a little bit about bias and artificial intelligence?
Wow, you are hitting everything that I do. Oh my goodness.
That's what I'm here for now.
Wow. This is one of those spaces which I think is also equally interesting when we talk about artificial intelligence. I mean, artificial intelligence, just for the layperson, really has a lot to do with, the extent to which we are relying upon computers to make predictions around, certain realities that we actually have in life. The movies that you watch, artificial intelligence is a big driving force to sort of suggest whether or not you're going to watch more of those types of movies. The purchases that we make, artificial intelligence is part of the design and the decision-making and the predictions as to whether or not you're going to purchase more of those purses or more of those, electronic devices. That micro intelligence is essentially changing worlds in ways that we never imagined before.
Wow.
But at the same token, that micro intelligence has the ability to create bias. And what does that mean? It biases when the intelligence sort of adapts to the context in which it was actually developed or deployed. Meaning, when artificial intelligence systems are built in a laboratory, and for, let's just say, criminal justice algorithms.
Okay.
And that criminal justice algorithm in the laboratory is essentially saying to a judge, I'm going to help you streamline through your case workload and make great predictions as to who should receive bail or who should not, who should be detained and who should not. That's all fine. But where it gets sticky is when the artificial intelligence of itself detains African-American men longer than white men.
Right.
And the reason it does that is not necessarily always the case that the developer was biased, but because the data that is depending upon, the behaviors, the history is already biased to start. And so as a result, we see the algorithm acting the same way that an unfair criminal justice system does. Do you see what I mean?
Wow.
And that's where we as a community have to be careful about this area of bias. It's an area I work very closely on because I believe as everything migrates online, the more data that is collected about us, the more that people know, it opens up this opportunity to actually go down the wrong pathway.
Right.
And when you go down the wrong pathway for people who have already been disproportionately oppressed, you actually create another dungeon for us to reside because we're less apart or farther apart from the opportunities that we want to get at. So for example, another example, when algorithms determine somebody's creditworthiness, Chris, and it's not determined by, a simple FICO score, because the lender can look at your FICO score and then go to your social media platform and look at your photo and then pick up your purchasing behavior and then figure out, you were just looking at pawn shops for your aunt, but it's under your IP address. That's when you start creating, I think, this spiral where we then will become disproportionately denied loans. Wow. And so I'm not a scientist, I'm a sociologist. And I find it great when a sister can sit next to engineers and sort of talk about this in a way that they say, we never thought about this.
Right.
Of course you didn't, because this is not at the center of the work in which you do, right? And so, I spent a lot of time there. And I think particularly post-COVID-19, all of us have been home consuming even more data.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be
Yeah.
surprised if we come out of this that the COVID get well quick schemes are going to be coming to the African American community.
Oh, you're so right. You know, you're right. And I like the term you use. Well, I don't like it, but the term you use, dungeon, I think really helps paint the picture in our mind. It's like a digital dungeon that they're trying to, not they're trying to put us in, but it seems like it could be potentially.
Yeah, no, it's something serious. I mean, look, technology has afforded us all of these wonderful like efficiencies. I mean, I love it that I don't have to go out to the grocery store sometimes. I can order my Instacart. You know, I like it that you know, on Christmas and holidays and birthdays, the computer sort of dictated what I bought before to give me a good suggestion or recommendation. But what I don't like is, you know, a couple of things is one, when it micro targets me as an African American woman, it makes other assumptions about me as a result of my class and my race. But I also don't like the fact that there's not enough of us working in Silicon Valley to tell people that that's what it's going to do.
Right.
So
and
at
that
the end
leads
of the day, yeah.
No, and that kind of leads to my next. So we've talked about the issues. What are some ways that we can right now help to fix some of those potential issues?
You know, I think it's important on the AI side, and I'll kind of break it down. I think on the AI side, it's important to have much more diversity in the workforce. And it's also important for us to think about the digital space the same way that, you know, Sigmas like John Lewis thought about the civil rights space in terms of equity around employment and the lunch counter. This is the same debate. You know, the civil rights laws do not go out of the window simply because we're doing stuff online. You know, the same lunch counter debate that happened in Woolworth Diner is the same debates that we're seeing, you know, when Uber drivers don't pick up Black men or Airbnb doesn't rent to Black women. You know, it's the same issue. It's also worse to the extent that they can identify us so easily, right? And put other assumptions based on other activity that we have. So I think that that's the first thing. We got to get like the Voting Rights Act and the Fair Employment, Fair Housing and the Fair Credit Act all to apply to the digital space. There's just no exception. People should not start by designing algorithms and AI systems that discriminate, and they should end there. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is we need to have a really proactive response to digital inequity. We have to start seeing digital inequity as one of those areas that is as important as the air that we breathe. We have to ensure that educational systems address equity in ways that ensure that our kids will not be skipped over or left behind. That's most important going forward out of this COVID strat. I would even suggest that we start talking about an inclusive COVID-19, post-COVID-19 strategy. We can't let this slide out of our hands and not think about all of the consequences and now and into the future that are going to be impacting Black communities. I mean, the wealth gap. Think about the fact that people are working, how that's actually going to contribute to the employment and the wealth gap. So I think going forward, we need to take these things seriously, and the extent to which we can wrap a digital agenda around this in terms of training up our folks to work in these new fields and these new industries, because some of these stores that we left ain't coming back, right? And so,
sadly.
Sorry for those of you, I am a PhD and I use the word ain't, but I'm okay with it. I'm sitting in your living room right now, and I'm sitting in mine holding my phone. Okay?
Don't apologize. This is your platform. Go ahead.
I know, but you got me up here like really preaching to the choir. But I guess, you know, the key thing for me is like we need to start embracing this agenda more seriously and start thinking about the role of innovation in terms of how we work, how we produce, how we perform as small business owners. I mean, for me, it's like, our businesses that were affected were businesses that, unfortunately, in some cases could not be converted to digital. So we need to like reassess that. Like, do we have businesses that are resilient enough to go into this online economy, or are we really with businesses that have to stay analog? You know, something to think about going forward.
Food for thought. We have some audience questions, so I'll ask those before I get back to mine. The first one is, can we speak on House Resolution 6666, the Trace Act, as what is being put forth about the $100 billion in grants for it?
So is that the Trace Act? I have my computer in front of me and I'm holding my phone, so I can't go back to what's specifically in there. Can you ask the viewer to just tell me, is this the relief part of it or the Trace Act in terms of contact tracing?
Okay, let's see. Okay, if he is watching, he'll respond. In the meantime, Brother Souvenir asks, Does the Universal Service Fund address any of this divide, or does it need to be retooled both in its collection and distribution so that it addresses these technology gaps?
Yes. Hey there, brother Souvenir. I see you out there. So I think in terms of the digital divide, in terms of universal service, I think that currently there are universal service programs that can address some of the inequities that I'm talking about. The E-rate program, for example, has the ability to fund schools on technology access, whether it's devices, etc. The challenge is that schools have used the E-rate funds primarily for schools.
Mm-hmm.
And where we're experiencing the challenge and disconnect is in communities. So I think that we need to reevaluate universal service and what that looks like so that we can actually fund like churches to actually become digital hotspots. There aren't a lot of like cafes that sit in our communities. There's not a lot of Starbucks that show up unless it's Magic Johnson Owen, right? So are we wiring local places? I did a study recently so people can find all my work on my website, drnicolespeaks.com, or you can find it on the Brookings Expert page. But I did a study between Alabama and Phoenix just in terms of the type of transference of technology learning from students to their homes. And in Alabama, Marion, in particular, Perry County, there was a woman from Bridgeport, a Black woman who sold all her belongings and opened up something called The Social in downtown Marion. She offered the kids free Wi-Fi and ice cream.
Wow.
And she did it based on all of her own money. So what I'm suggesting in the terms of the question, we do need to relook at universal service to be much more encompassing of the community infrastructure. Right now, there is no funding going to any community organizations outside of libraries and schools. That is showing right now that that's a problem. So let's figure out how to actually get more universal service fund dollars to communities that require it the most, that may not have those anchor institutions.
Wow. Brother Souvenir, I hope that answered your question. Okay. I have to ask this. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but this is a question that's been on my mind a lot. We hear the word fifth generation or 5G a lot. Can you explain what it is and how it affects communities?
Yes. So I just wrote a paper on that. So probably everything that I'm talking about right now, I have a paper on. So again, you can find it. And I know the Sigmas read, so I'm going to tell you to go look at my stuff. 5G is going to be interesting. So fifth generation technology, right now we're on 4G LTE, which is allowing us to do this type of stream. 5G is actually going to be more promising because we're going to be able to do things like remote medicine, distance learning, teleporting, whatever you call it. The bandwidth is going to be so high and the latency so low to reduce the number of call drops and to sort of perfect the stream. In many respects, that's positive, particularly for African Americans, and I'll tell you why. Where we have a lack of hospitals and we're moving towards telehealth and telemedicine, having a faster connection actually can be helpful because you never have to leave the comfort of your home or your community to take 3 buses, right, to get to the emergency room, because the quality of care will be serviced in a way that it'll be precise. That's a good thing, right? There's 5G technologies that will be able to be placed, sensors on school buses that can tell you when you're inside the house that the school bus is around the corner, or if your kid actually got to school in real time. There's people who are aging in place where with a faster kind of mobile connectivity are able to actually get access to medicine or doctors in real time to really, look at prognoses around cardiovascular health, etc. So that's all the potential of 5G. Yeah, you can download your Netflix movie in 2 seconds. Yeah, you might be able to see your boo in real time and clarity, but that's not really what it's really there for, okay, folks? It's really there, I think, to be the next generation of technology to enable economic benefits as well as public benefits. China, the paper I just recently wrote, is using it for that respect. But I do want to actually put out there, because there have been a lot of conspiracy theories about 5G, this coronavirus. Don't believe the hype. That I really honestly say it is concerning, the correlation. But China, having been to China several times in the last few years, there were other issues that I think were surfacing around the coronavirus that have nothing to do with the radioactive waves. It doesn't weaken your body. The United States government, or any government, the European Union is doing 5G. There's tons of countries I could name off, would not put out any technologies that were proven to be invasive to our bodies and be something that was detrimental to our health. It's my opinion that what's detrimental to our health is holding our phones to our head for 24 hours, but that's not a 5G problem. That's a problem of overconsumption of technology, because you shouldn't have that much electricity or electronics around you, that much. Right. But, going forward, I think it's important for the African American community to be wary of, to be aware of the scientific, reliable data, while at the same time thinking about, really, we want to be up in arms, and be honest, since, I'm being all raw and stuff, it's after hours. I've done about 4 of these, and I'm feeling really comfortable. The thing is, we want to be honest about it. We should be asking and demanding jobs that come out of these 5G networks. There will be over, 20 million jobs, I believe, or 2 million jobs that will be created as a result of building these networks, raising the poles, doing the customer service, harnessing the data. And right now, we don't have enough people eligible to go into those jobs. And so I think, again, it kind of goes back to my earlier point. In all of this technology, we need to continue to ask ourselves, do we want to be passive consumers? Do we want to just be the first in line? Or do we want to be a part of the broader conversations that is reinventing and creating and imagining what a new society looks like with tech? And I would just implore everybody, start thinking that way. There will be new businesses that come out of this, some of them related to infrastructure like 5G, some new technology-enabled companies, contact tracers that are going to be needed to do digital surveillance. Are we ready to take those jobs? And so I think it's really important for us to start really peeling back the onion and saying, I was telling somebody, what would have happened if all of the essential workers outside of the medical practitioners who are working in our grocery stores, who were, putting our packages together, who were Black and brown people putting their lives at risk, stop working?
Wow.
Think about it.
Wow.
You wouldn't be getting your food delivered. You wouldn't be getting your, your package delivered. You probably wouldn't be getting your food made, because that's what we were during this pandemic. We were in the front lines. We were Benjamin, Crispus Attucks in the Revolutionary War. We took the bullets. And yet at the same time, we're being profiled in ways that's just completely unfair. And so I think going forward, it's important for us to start to think about, how do we, one, vote? I see somebody's comment on change of administration, but then two, how do we start demanding action around these new areas that are going to be the new economy going forward?
That is a great call to action. That is very
it's deep, right?
Yeah, very deep. But of course, Dr. Lee,
figure out how to protest next. We could have all just stayed home.
Right, and Dr. Lee, but I expect nothing less from you. You're very deep. So of course, you're very insightful. We have our brother is back he has more confirmation, more clarification with his question. So he's asking, HR 66 will have 100 billion through Secretary of Health and Human Services to award to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for the virus. So let me try to go back to his. Oh, go ahead.
I think I'll share this. My colleague and I, Rashawn Ray over at Brookings, are thinking about this piece. And I think that investment is about right in terms of the act. So I'm grateful for them to come back with more clarification. I think on the medical testing side, it's pretty important that if we're going to reopen our country, that we have testing, and we have testing in particular in our communities where we've been disproportionately affected. I'd like us to think about the differences between testing and vaccination, though. And I'm not sure how that particular act is actually going to contribute towards trials or clinical trials of new vaccinations. I know many of us on this call have heard of the Tuskegee experiment. I know a lot of us have heard about Henrietta Lacks. And in no respects am I saying that we as a people should push against vaccinations, but we need to make sure in this allocation of funding that, one, they are developing, inclusive data sets in terms of, the wellness aspects of this disease. But we also need to make sure that there's education around clinical trials and vaccination testing that are not disproportionately affecting our communities simply because, in some states we've been geo-fenced in. So in Florida, for example, the governor opened up most of Florida, said Broward County and Miami-Dade. And who do you think lives there?
African American minority
I'm a
community.
little, I think we need as much money as possible to advance and accelerate testing. But we also need this money to also go towards education and awareness raising. And, you know, potentially not necessarily a full indemnification of medical providers if sometime down the line we find out the vaccination in early stages affected us in ways that, you know, we are chronically ill. And so my colleague and I, we've been really grappling with this because we feel in some respects, Chris, that it's okay to do universal funding for these types of broad initiatives, but is anyone paying attention to the history? Like, we keep paying attention to health disparities, but we're also paying attention to the history of health inequity from a historical perspective of how that's been imposed upon communities of color.
Because as we know, it can repeat itself, and that's what we want to avoid, obviously.
Right, and this disease has been completely profiled over the last couple of weeks, right? It's been a conversation. You know, when you look at the protests, and I put on my Facebook page the other day, a man carrying like an AK-47 in front of a Subway shop, white man looking at his phone carrying this. And I started to think to myself, when I look at these protests, it's not our people that want to open up, because the disease has been profiled as a racial disease. And so even though COVID-19 has affected every facet of society, rural white folks have been affected by this disease. People with insufficient health care have been affected by this disease, right? But for some reason, the media has painted, or the administration primarily has painted this as a racial disease. And so I think we need to be careful, because when it's painted as a racial disease or some kind of pathological problem, they then tend to look at us, because we always take the first shot, always take the first bullet as the test case. And I think to your viewers' question, we need to really carefully look at what's in that bill to ensure that it's going to be equitably distributed in terms of the money, but it's also going to be done in a way that is inclusive in terms of the healthcare.
So since we have education, and you've touched on it before, I want to specifically get to it. What resources are there for educators to take advantage of teaching their classrooms during this time and even after this time?
Well, I think the teachers and the schools have done a pretty good job, right, in terms of the instructional content for mainstream students, right? So if you have a child, I have two at home that essentially know how to get online, get to their classrooms, get on Blackboard, whatever, the Google Blackboard, it's fine. But where educators are struggling, and I talked to a lot of superintendents in the last few weeks, I've talked to a lot of state superintendents. One is on special learning, special disabilities of kids, where you're sending to an autistic family, a family of an autistic child, 7 links to get online. I was on a call, and a parent explained to me how she's just given up and throwing her hands up at this point, because looking at the frustration of her son trying to navigate through this online space. I mean, Fairfax County, the county which I'm in, recently had a headline story in the Washington Post about how the school had problems with online learning, but it really failed our special needs students. So I think educators are doing the best that they can. I mean, they're trying to figure this out in real time, which is why I have literally made a call to educational systems. You need to have a plan. And the plan is not just about distance learning, Chris. It's about remote access. It's about having the right type of tools for the right type of student, the most appropriate tool, and then ensuring that the teachers understand, but then also the parents understand. I'm hearing stories, right? I was in an NBC News segment on the remote side where parents are sitting in their cars in these digital parking lots with 5 or 6 kids in the back, was in the story, doing their homework off of laptops and going from community to community to get access. So educators going forward, you have to realize, and the state superintendent of Alabama said this very well to me. He said, I can handle the instructional side, and I can do a better job just also realizing the different learning styles. He said, but what I can't do is negotiate a broadband contract for my families. And so I think going forward, the reimagination of education is going to be very different. And we're going to have to create those spaces that really push for the type of engagement from both teachers as well as administrators and families and community partners and the whole nine, right? We need to start embracing what the new educational model looks like going forward.
My father's in special education, so teaches in special education, and that was really close to me. That was really profound.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, the solution has been to put it on TV. But when this woman told me about the fact that like I was suggesting, I said, it was too bad when we were giving out free and reduced price lunch, we didn't give like assistive learning technology. So I was trying to propose to schools when people were picking up lunches, because we did a very good job of student nutrition centers, we should have given them a tablet and a Wi-Fi hotspot. And then if a kid needed additional assistance, give them an instruction format or help the parent, there was some, even though we went into a scare about contact, there was going to be some contact that was made. And obviously giving out those lunches was one of them. Or in Montgomery County, I saw the lines of kids actually receiving their iPads, right? So I think we just failed. We failed certain populations. We failed them. And what's worse about it is the more that we fail them, and I want people to hear this, our community education has been the trajectory and pathway to success. And the more that we keep this conversation going and this indecisiveness about equity, then our kids are going to lose 6 to 8 months of good in-classroom instruction. And we have kids that are already behind. And so I would just, again, implore all of us, and particularly the Sigmas who are educators, let's have a decent conversation on a blueprint for education that combines both the distance learning and the remote access.
It's profound. Okay. Oh, we have one more question, and then I'll get to my last point. So the question comes from CJ. He says, "Will we come to a space where homeschooling with digital options are preferred?"
No, because I don't want to homeschool my kids.
You heard it from the expert.
I'm a PhD. I'm not a teacher. I tell you, I want to just go hug every one of my kids' teachers, because I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it. So I think, to a serious note, I think homeschooling is going to become an option. I think we're actually going to see a lot of parents sort of stick with this program, particularly if adults don't want to go back to work because of their fear, and offices allow people to remotely work. I don't think it's going to be the norm, though. I think too many of us got to get back to work to make homeschooling an option, unfortunately. But I do think what we're actually going to see, and I'm making this prediction, is that we'll actually see more schools, instead of sending home just the workbooks and the paper stuff, are going to start sending home more digital assignments to get the kids more acclimated to using digital. I see somebody with tears in their eyes, probably either laughing at me or
he asked the question, so I think he's laughing at your response.
I mean, the homeschooling is hard, man. I'm telling you, I don't want to see that as an only option. But I do agree with your question that we need to start integrating many more digital options into the mix so that our kids have a full breadth of, really not just the instructional stuff, but this is the new way of life. This is how stuff is going to get done. I was asking my daughter in here the other day. She spends a majority of her time when she's not online with this thing called TikTok. And Chris, I know I haven't done a TikTok.
I've heard of it.
TikTok, right? But so she spends a lot of time there. So we asked her the other day if she would actually take her experience, and since I've been home, I've been trying to figure out ways to like up my brand and work on my digital products. And so I said, can you take this and can you make this into a movie? She did it in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. She was like, okay,
talent.
done. It had labels. It was timed out. It had background music. And I would say to everybody who's watching, that is a new way that our kids are going to work. It is going to be less about what we did in terms of having the credentials and, making sure that we had our T's crossed and our I's dotted when it came to completing certain tasks. The new economy is going to be looking for people like our kids. And we have to make the determination. Now, we went through a whole wave of STEM, and not all of us have STEM kids. My oldest kid is not a STEM kid. He's a humanities kid. But at the end of the day, his humanities is going to actually ask him, to go into areas like data science and others that are honestly places that we're not showing up. And so I love the fact that you ask about artificial intelligence. I love all of the questions that you're asking, because at the end of the sentence for all of those professions is digital.
Right.
And so we have to take this ugly consequence of what this virus has done and convert that into resiliency and long games for our communities going forward. If not, we're going to be right back here doing the things that other people dictated for us and not necessarily creating or architecting a new future.
Dr. Lee, you love my questions, but your answers were 10 times better. I appreciate you. And can you let us know where we can find you? And before you let us know, this talk will be on YouTube within the next 2 days. So this whole talk you can watch and share and all this valuable information.
With my dirty camera too, right?
You are good to go. No, you're good. This whole talk will be on YouTube within the next 2 days, so we can share this so everyone can hear the information that may have missed the stream. So Dr. Lee, where can we find you?
So if you want to stay in touch with me, I'm actually on Instagram, so you can follow me on Dr. Turner Lee, and you'll get all of the information about my forthcoming book, the things that I'm working on. If you want to go a little deeper, I'm on Twitter at Dr. Turner Lee. You see the pattern. Oh. Okay, so at Dr. Turner Lee on Twitter, at Dr. Turner Lee on IG. And then, as I mentioned before, you can find me on my personal webpage, which is Nicole Speaks, Dr. Nicole Speaks, which is on my www.drnicolespeaks. Or you can find me on Brookings on my expert page. And there you can find all of my readings and writings and talks, etc. But I want to say thank you, Chris. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to, great, Dr. Nicole Speaks. So no period. So it's just at Dr. Turner Lee.
Oh,
and then
no
Dr.
period.
Nicole Speaks, no period. www.drnicolespeaks. Speaks. But I want to thank you because I think it's important, this conversation that we're having. And so I'm very happy to have participated. And as I told Jacob, I never say no to a Sigma because the fraternity has been very, very wonderful to me and my family over the years. So I'm happy to be here to participate.
Thank you. And you've been very kind and good to us. So I appreciate you. Dr. Lee, I hope to have you on soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining episode 3 of SigmaTalks. Everyone have a good evening, and please soak up this information.
Yes, and stay in touch with me. Hey,
and stay in touch, yes.
Stay in touch.
We're going to put the YouTube link out when it's ready and tag Dr. Lee and everything.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.